Hi there, BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is still my period where I've recused myself from reviews, but I am still recording them. I just won't publish them till after the Not the Booker prize has been announced on October the 15th. So I'm going to talk about a couple of books today. The first is The Long Take by Robertson. This is one of only two books on the Man Booker list of, 12 or 16 that are, sounded at all interesting to me. So I'll be talking about this book. And the other was Two Sketches of Disjointed Happiness by Simon Kinch. Okay, we're going to start with The Long Take. And the first thing to see is that it's published by Picador Poetry. So this is a poetry book, apparently. To me it isn't. It's a novel. It's lyrical prose, of course, but it's, So this is what it looks like. Well, of course, poetry could be anything, it doesn't have to have rhymes and all that kind of stuff. So, if they want to call it poetry, it is poetry. And Robertson is a poet. I think this is his first venture into the more novelistic side of it. And it's called The Long Take, and that's a term from filmmaking. And that's what this book is very much. It is noir-style, panoramic view of Los Angeles between 1948 and 1953, when Los Angeles underwent a huge sort of architectural assault, really, for want of a better word, in that a lot of the communities were demolished and replaced by the sort of major road network that runs through Los Angeles. And then that necessitated parking spaces. So it's really a lament for the old Los Angeles, but also all the sort of the corrupt deals that surrounded land deals, and the sort of ethnic and social cleansing of the inner city communities to facilitate this building. So it is through the eye of a Canadian who first served in the war and very much suffers post-traumatic stress disorder sort of flashbacks. And he moves to New York after the war with not very much in his pocket. And then a chance meeting with a filmmaker, and so he sort of decamps to Los Angeles. And the bulk of the book is set in Los Angeles. This character is called Walker, which I think is a deliberately chosen ironic name, because he is a sort of flaneur in a city that is going to become increasingly dominated by cars, so there will be no such thing as walking in Los Angeles, no flaneuring. And he gets a job on the city desk of one of the newspapers, so that he covers sort of all the sort of deaths and violence. And there's a lot about that. There's a lot about the sort of, people being increasingly forced onto the street as homeless, the increasing size of Skid Row, of drunks, of ex-soldiers with PTSD, of sort of the rise of drug addicts. And it is told very much in the noir style. And, I think it's a superb elegy for Los Angeles, really. Being poetry, there is some beautiful writing, as you'd expect. And he was suddenly inside the chest of this giant body, exposed and displayed with its balance, its symmetry, staring up at this great atrium and the missing hearts of Los Angeles. Two elevators working up and down in their open cages. Stairwells, skylights, gantries, balustrades. The French filigree wrought-iron framework. The stairs of Belgian marble climbing to the vaulted sky. All the Mexican floor tiles, glazed brick. The polished Californian oak basking in a hall of light 100 feet high. A miniature city inside a city, intricate, efficient and exactly to scale. Perfect in its inner workings, its geometries of light. Stage machinery with the grillwork balconies, rote proscenium, bright acoustic, the light well drop. The hidden dream of another century's Europe, here, right here on Broadway, this delirium, how this city might have been, or how it is perhaps if you gaze with the fever of Piranesi, and see the elevators as scaffolds, guillotines with their cords and pulleys, the toothed wheels and hanging cables to block and tackle. See the deep arches, chains and iron gratings, the high surveillance walkways, these flights of stairs going nowhere, streets in the air. A carceri di vignezioni, here in Los Angeles, a limitless maze, prison, theatre, beauty and dread under the bright unsleeping eye. the pointless Californian sun, all hope lost along with all perspective. And there's lots of elegant pages like that and imagery. So although it's viewed through the eyes of a character, and he does have a backstory in it, and increasingly the book builds up with a great pace and sort of crescendo of alternating one of his specific flashbacks to when the Germans counterattacked after D-Day and his Canadian forces were on the run, with the wrecking ball in Los Angeles, demolishing buildings. And, you know, the two are side by side. They're both warscapes. And it's just brilliantly done. So the book is very much, as I say, it's very much noir. And it's an interesting relationship. Of course, Los Angeles is really the city of noir, in that he goes to see lots of movies. And he comes upon lots of movies being shot in the city. And, you know, so he's sort of moving, interacting with the directors and the actors and stuff. But it's as if, you know, noir was trying to capture the, you know, the reality, the truth of the underbelly of the city, and yet the city itself seems to want to exist as a, you know, as if it was in a film, you know, aspiring to all the values and the aesthetics of a film. And he has a line here saying, "American cities have no past, no history. Sometimes I think the only American history is on film." So, you know, this is a book, it's a book about a city and about its sort of change and its sort of corruption. So it's not a plot to follow, really. It is a sort of, as I say, it's a panoramic view of a city. And it reminded me of a non-fiction book that I read. Interestingly, the long take actually references Lewis Mumford's book, I assume The City and History. Lewis Mumford being the famous writer about city architecture, sort of city morphology and technology, all that kind of stuff. But actually, the book that it reminded me, again, non-fiction, is City of Quartz by Mike Davies, which is an extraordinary, you know, again, a sort of, but this is a non-fiction panorama of Los Angeles. More updated because the long take sort of set in the 40s and 50s. This is in the sort of, it does go back into the history of, you know, when Los Angeles was basically, you know, just empty land. But it's really about the sort of the 80s and 90s Los Angeles, such as the militarisation of the police force, where he sort of quotes something whereby, you know, it was more militaristic than the British Army that was currently fighting in Belfast against terrorism and stuff. And it's, you know, I want to reread this book because I've never read such a good book. It's almost like a biography of a city, if that makes any sense. And it's the best book on that sort of subject that I've ever read. So I'm going to reread. But, you know, it's a useful companion piece. If you could, I don't know if it's still in print or anything. It's, you know, you should, if you could read this in parallel with the long take, you know, I think you'd be rewarded by that. So, you know, I'm only going to read 2 books on the book list, as I said. So I can't, you know, I do want that book to win, but, you know, I haven't read 14 or 10 of the others. So it's a bit spurious me calling for that, really. On to 2 Sketches of Disjointed Happiness by Simon Kinch. So this has an interesting premise whereby an American backpacker from the Midwest, is it Wisconsin? I can't remember where he's from now. He receives a strange text while he's abroad in Europe from his girlfriend back home. And she's got the hump with him for sort of upping and leaving for 3 months anyway. And it's a bit of a sort of a vague message, but he sort of takes it that she's breaking up with him. And he sort of hurls his phone into the nearby sea because he's on the coast. And he has to decide what he's going to do because his visa's about to run out and he should be going home. He's got a return ticket. And that's where the book sets up its premise, where there are 2 divergent sort of storylines. One where he sort of, you know, thinks, okay, what have I got to go back home for? Nothing. So I'm just going to stay here beyond my visa, see what happens, just hang out and travel, be a bum, basically. And the other one is he does go home, but not to his girlfriend, but to, you know, to try and rebuild his life back home. And he gets a sort of, you know, a mundane job. And those are the 2 storylines that run alternately in alternate chapters. And sometimes there are echoes across the 2 because he's the same person. He may take 2 very radically different decisions, but he's the same person. And that's where the premise sort of, you know, doesn't sort of work. It's not enough, because let me read you what kind of person this character is. At some point, this is where he's, back in America with his, his job. At some point around mid-morning, she collects a pile of documents and heads off to a meeting. I look back at my computer screen. Something doesn't feel right. I feel overwhelmed, but God knows by what. And then another sort of version of that, really. At 1:45, Laura collected me from my desk and we went to lunch. We sat at a small table in 2 miniature armchairs with 2 coffees in corrugated paper cups and 2 triangular sandwiches in triangular packets in front of us. Laura was unusually quiet, so I had to make most of the conversation. Doing so made me realise that she was far better at making conversation than I was, which made me feel a little embarrassed and then a little annoyed. I wondered if something was troubling her, but didn't ask. I then began thinking about the burrito place, of sitting at the square table near the door, of my lunches alone, my only interaction with the shop owner who had learned my name. I looked down at my triangular sandwich. Laura asked me how my work was going. I didn't really feel like saying, but it was better than letting the conversation go stale. I tried to make it sound a little more important than it was and mentioned that Robert was off sick. Then, in place of asking her if anything was the matter, I complimented her on her top, even though I didn't like it that much. And there's so much of that in this book. It is motivated, by the act of his girlfriend leaving him or dumping him. So there's a lot about sort of women being attracted to him and his sort of inability to sort of connect and with them, because he's almost a mute. Those 2 passages I read just show, he exists, but he's not active. He's entirely passive, and you wonder what these women see in him. He's pretty unappealing, and actually quite annoying in the end to me. I mean, I just found him a character I had no sympathy for whatsoever in either of his 2 alternate histories. You just want to give him a slap. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of him just hanging out in cafes, drinking coffee or drinking alcohol, observing people, but not to any point, not coming out with any sort of profundities, really. And, letting people down, making sort of agreements with, to meet people and then, veering off somewhere else. The job's mundane. He gets a mundane sort of translation job when he sort of stays on in Spain. And there's just nothing to it in the end. And it's a really frustrating read. It reminded me of Ben Lerner's Leaving the Atocha Station, which again is a sort of indulged middle-class American, sort of just hanging around in Europe. But that had more to it, I feel. That was a better book because the character was deeper, interacted more with the environment, had relationships, was better at observing interesting things. This ultimately, to me, was vapid, unfortunately, and I didn't enjoy it. I can't remember whether I gave it 2 or 3 stars. The long take. I haven't actually rated because I've only just finished that just now, but I will probably give it 4.5 to 5 stars. So there you have it. I don't know when I'm going to release this. It'll be sometime after the 15th of October. Till next time. Thanks very much.